Hey y'all, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Godzilla Minus One, the Godzilla movie that came out last year. I'm not like a Godzilla person. I know like some people are really into Godzilla movies, and that's not me. So if you were looking for a comprehensive history of Godzilla lore and movies, it was your wrong video. But I really like the Godzilla movie. It was beautiful. It made me cry both times I've seen it. It made me cry multiple times the second time I saw it. And I just think it's like cinematic gold. It's like really beautiful. And had like really interesting themes and like plot and characters that I just really wanted to discuss. So today that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna tell you why I love a Godzilla movie so much. I want to start with a trigger warning about war, PTSD, child abandonment, death, shooting, deep water, the ocean, like there's a lot of stuff in this movie. So if you don't like those things, don't watch this. And highly recommend, always checking like a list of MPAA like ratings, like why they rated things that way before you consume media, just in case it might be triggering to you, and that you can like prepare yourself if you still want to see it. Be like, okay, well I know where I might be triggered, and that is okay. But anyway, it's a great movie. Godzilla is so good. Godzilla Minus One, I should say. I feel a little like 40s-esque with these glasses. I feel a little like Doc in the movie. Godzilla Minus One is really interesting because it's a war movie, kind of, in that at the beginning of the movie, it's still the war. It's World War II in Japan. But pretty quickly it is not. It's like really the first scene is the war, and then everything after that is post-war, which I think in and of itself for a war movie is interesting, just because we spend a lot of time on the fighting, and on the like events of the war versus like the fallout of the war, and specifically the fallout of like the atomic bomb dropping on Japan is really interesting because literal fallout, and also just like a lot happening, like things are significantly different there historically, unique there than anywhere else ever, besides I guess like Chernobyl, but especially given that it was like war torn and what was going on. A lot of this movie is about Japanese culture, and specifically about kind of the rub of collectivism versus like individualism, where I would say like the West and like America specifically is intensely individualist in that like it's all about me, personal rights, like my right to do what I want to do with my stuff, and like my right to privacy and stuff, all of which can be very good. But there's definitely like there's a lack of collectivism in America as far as like what's good for the greater group as opposed to what's good for the individual. We generally side on individual rights, and other countries like Japan are a lot more collectivist, where they're all about like the group and like what is good for the majority of people, which also has benefits, but also has downsides as well. And I think they did a good job in this movie of showing you the kind of bad side of collectivism and why it feels like they're fighting for more of like a collectivism, like a collective of individualisms, of like each person giving to the collective because they want to, instead of because it's like culturally required, or like it's just the way we do it. That like a more selfless like way to be a part of the collective and help people, as opposed to like duty and honor. It is like kindness and self-sacrifice, which is beautiful and I think was really lovely, and I think is a nice way to look at it. So yeah, that's kind of like the themes we're working with. I'm gonna get into like the plot and how it goes with those themes, but I just wanted to kind of give that overview as an idea to explain. Since I'm a historian, I have to bring up something historically related, which is that in Confucianism, there are what are called like the 5 relationships. And I want to say the 5 relationships are father, son, mother, daughter, husband and wife, older brother, younger brother, and friend. And in those 5 relationships, friend is the only one that's equal, as opposed to like the other ones are like somebody's above you. But the idea is supposed to be like someone's in charge of you, but the person is being taken care of by this person, like protected and, kept safe, and like provided for and what have you. And the person below is like respectful to the person above, but they understand that they are like below the person as far as like status, like they have to like listen to them, you know? So like father son is, you know, kind of the classic of like, well, he's my dad, I have to listen to him, I have to respect him because he's my father, but also he's keeping me safe, he's providing me with food and a place to live and like whatever I need, and like he's supposed to teach me lessons and I'm supposed to be respectful, kind, and supportive. And that is generally the relationship that we associate with governments in the East, is that it's supposed to be like a father-son situation of like the government is your father and they are protecting you and providing you with what you need. And then you are the son who is willing to, you know, listen, follow orders, and, you know, do his Confucian duty to the father. These are also called, what is the name for it? It's called filial piety also. Not the 5 relationships that are called filial piety, but filial piety is like having reverence for your parents, basically. Like understanding that your parents are intelligent, that they know more than you do, that they deserve respect inherently because they are your parents. And so like having reverence basically for your parents and your family. And both of those are really important in this movie. But specifically, what's interesting to me is like, I think a lot of Japanese culture, especially related to the government and collectivism, revolves around that relationship of like a father-son relationship in Confucianism between the government and the people. And this movie challenges that a lot. And I think that was really lovely and interesting. And yeah, I enjoy that a lot. So we're going to get more into like that, you know, nitty gritty, nerdy history stuff as I go. But also I'm going to just talk about some stuff that I think made it a good film that I enjoyed. Okay, so like I said, most of the movie is post-war except for like the first scene. But the first scene is like really important to set up like what's going on and like people's character arcs and stuff. So the intro is on Odo Island, where Shikishima is the main character. He lands his plane and gets it to like mechanics, who then are like looking at it and trying to figure out what's wrong with his plane, because he's a kamikaze pilot and he has landed there because his plane was malfunctioning. So like he was not going to be able to crash his plane into where he's supposed to go. And they look at it and the mechanics are like, hey bud, I don't think there's anything wrong with your plane. And immediately, I love that. Like fascinating about the idea, like kamikazes in general, like that's very Japanese, that's very World War II. But fascinating of an idea of like a kamikaze pilot who is like, doesn't want to do it, right? Is like given this duty and like is in the war and that's what he's supposed to do. And he's just like, I don't want to do that. And I think that was really like immediately very intriguing as a character, immediately very interesting, because like I said, that's immediately like collectivism versus individualism, right? For the collective, he's supposed to crash his plane and die. And he's like, I don't want to do that. Like I have a potential life to live. I have a family. That's not what I want to do. Like that just feels like a waste of my life. And it does really put into perspective, like how disturbing that is. That, you know, the government was like, hey, just crash the plane and die for your country because we said so. Even though like kamikazes almost never really did that much damage to the other side, they were really not an effective way to fight. And I think we're mostly done as like a cultural scare tactic, personally. Like, I don't know that for sure. I'm not like super informed about kamikaze stuff, but as far as I know, was not actually like a good strategy. And I think, you know, maybe also as a control tactic for the people to be like, hey, this is the level of dedication we expect from you for the government, which is crazy. Like, there's a difference between like, you need to be willing to die for your country as far as like signing up for the military, and you need to be willing to crash your plane intentionally for essentially no reason, because we just said so, is wildly intense. And so, you know, he gets questioned like, hey, I think that your plane's fine. And I immediately got like big eyes and like, oh no, because questioning someone's honor in like Japanese culture, very bad, right? Like that's very insulting and very concerning. That's like the most important thing in Japanese culture generally is personal honor and like family honor. And then by extension, like honor to the country. And so questioning his like personal honor and his like dedication to the country, especially like in the middle, you know, like not the middle, I guess, but at the end of World War II, when he's supposed to be doing this, like what it essentially is viewed as like a big heroic sacrifice, is wow, that's a big thing to do, to just be like, hey, I think you're not doing your job, and I don't think you're willing to commit yourself to what the government has asked you to do. And I was like, ooh, and yet we see him, you know, immediately hiding from his duty and being judged for hiding. That they're like, this is not acceptable. Like clearly the mechanics are looking at him judgmentally, and he's like, what are you trying to say? Right? But he knows exactly what they're trying to say. And they're right. He is hiding. And like, I think that immediately makes the audience connect with him too, that we're seeing him immediately like kind of be a coward. But in a way that's so relatable, that's like, of course, that's such a horrible thing. And I think by like modern sentiments, that is really horrible. And like the idea that you would be having to do that is wild to most of us. And so we're like, yeah, that's fair. That seems like it's terrible and like not useful and bad. But it was expected, right? And so it's like, oh, really? You're not going to do your job? And yeah, that's concerning. And it also shows us, I think one of the cool things that's like really obvious to me, at least in the movie, is like each character has a different, you know, like, or maybe not different, but each character has their own set of stress responses, like fight, flight, fawn, freeze. And we very quickly see that Shikishima's are flight and freeze, like pretty much immediately, which, you know, probably the worst to have in the war. I guess maybe fawn might not be great unless you've been captured, but hopefully it's fight, and for him it is not. It is, you know, he flights away, literally, and then he freezes, you know, in like the face of questioning, and then also he you know, he's here on Odo trying to get his plane fixed when it doesn't get fixed, stalling, and they get attacked by Godzilla while he's there. Very funny in that the one of the people immediately says Godzilla, and you're like, what? And he's like, oh, I heard from like an old legend, like that's the name of the creature. Like, so they had a legend of this like giant creature that attacks, and it was Godzilla. And I was like, that's very funny, because I don't feel like normally they immediately like, look, it's Godzilla. But also, I didn't know this, that Godzilla, I guess, originally was, I think the first movie came out in 1953, and originally Godzilla was like a metaphor for atomic bombs, which makes sense, because it just kind of comes out of nowhere and destroys everything, you know? Anyway, Godzilla attacks, and, you know, the mechanics all like get guns and hide in like a foxhole, basically, and then like a little bunker, and then they're like, Shikishima, go get in your plane and shoot it to help us, right? But he's seeing people shoot at it and they're getting destroyed. Later, one of them describes it, I was like, what's his name? Tachibana. Tachibana describes it as he watched one of the guys get squished like a bug. And I love that, one, because this movie is in Japanese. And they're, you know, so I saw it with like English subtitles because I don't speak Japanese. And love that because the subtitles were so good. Like, not only did they feel like really accurate as far as like to what was happening, but they also like included slang and stuff. Like, instead of being like, what will we do now? They were like, so what are we gonna do? And it was amazing to me how immediately that made the characters more like human to me, you know, because I think with a language barrier, there's an automatic feeling of like, there's a roboticism from the subtitles, and then because of that you don't feel like super connected to the character. I think that's why a lot of people prefer like dubbed anime, because then they're like, oh well, it's in my language and like I can understand like the voice acting better and I can understand the feelings better and all of those things, because you miss out a lot on like intonation and emphasis and things like that when you don't speak the language that it's in. And I think they did a really good job in these subtitles of like making it feel alive, like feel like they were people, you know, and saying squash like a bug it's like a, you know, it's like a colloquialism that I don't even know if they have in Japanese. But it really made me be like, yeah. And it also was like devastating, like visually, the idea that like, these are your friends, you know, these guys, and then you just watched just like he was nothing, you know, like he was just annoying and this thing just squashed him on his foot, because he does, or she does, I don't remember the gender of Godzilla, but you know, just gets squashed by this giant monster. And so I was like, yeah, that's really poignant. But anyway, Shigeshima is in his plane and has a freeze response. Doesn't shoot, doesn't do anything. Godzilla attacks his plane. He like tries to run away and he gets knocked out. And when he wakes up, he's still alive. Godzilla didn't kill him. Like, his freeze response worked in that, like, I think Godzilla was like, oh, he's dead. But he wakes up and, like, everyone else is dead except for Tachibana. There's only one survivor, is like the main mechanic guy. And he is, it's such a beautiful visual of collectivism. He is like picking up these guys, pulling them all together on this beach, lining the bodies up, like to organize them and so you can see where they all are, while he's limping because he got hurt pretty badly in the leg by Godzilla. And like the fact that he's like limping, on the beach, like in sand, trying to get these guys all lined up, I was like, wow, this is like really beautiful, like how much he cares about these people and like how important his duty is for him. And I love that about Tachibana. He's one of my favorite characters, and he's like kind of the antagonist besides like Godzilla. Godzilla is the only real antagonist besides like the Japanese government. But Tachibana a little bit. But one of my favorite things about this movie is that like I feel like I understand everybody's feelings and like motivation and like why they're doing what they're doing at all times in the movie. And that to me is like a well-written movie that I understand where everyone's coming from, even though they're having disagreements, and I get it, just like nobody is acting in a way that's irrational to me. No one's acting in a way that's like confusing. Everybody is reacting in a way that makes sense. And then there's still, like drama and fighting and issues, because there still are. But anyway, Tachibana is like lining these guys up. It's incredibly sad. It's a beautiful visual. It's very sad. And Shigeshima wakes up and it's like, oh my god, like everybody's dead. And Tachibana is like really mad at him because he didn't do his duty, right? He like got in the plane, he told him to shoot, he didn't shoot, and like, look at all these guys are dead. And he's like, this is your fault. And even then I was like, okay, like Tachibana needs somebody to blame, and it's hard to blame giant lizard who's gone. So he's blaming Shigeshima, because, to me, that's like him talking to himself. Like Tachibana is saying like, this is my fault. He just doesn't know, but that first of all, it's not his fault either. But second of all, like, I think he's just like projecting. It's like, well, this is your fault. If you had just done this, we'd be okay. And like, I think a lot of times, especially after traumatic events, people are like, well, if this just happened, we would have been fine, because then it feels like there's more control and like there's something to do better next time, instead of just like a giant monster came out of the sea and destroyed us and there was nothing we could do, which is like the reality, right? It's like there wasn't preventing this. That was just gonna happen. But now Tachibana and Shigeshima have double trouble survivor's guilt in that they both lived through the war, and especially for Shigeshima, like he was supposed to die. Like that was his job. And now the war is over. And so great, so he goes home and, man, the just filled with ruins, like super decimated, abandoned. And fascinating in like a way that I've never really thought about, because usually, like as historians, you also don't really think about post-war stuff a lot that's not like governmentally involved. It's not like, oh, the economy. Oh, like what are the relations with other nations? Like, oh, are they being, given sanctions or something? Don't usually think of it, I don't think, on like a superhuman level, like a micro level. And he goes home, like to his home that's like decimated, right? It's like, the roof is broken, it's like bulldozed basically, and just stays there, like stays the night there, and his neighbor too. Like they're living in ruins, right? And it's like, yeah, because that's their home, right? Like that's where they know it to be, even if it's like gone. And there's something so like beautifully human and like sad about that, but also like kind of lovely that it's like the structure is gone, but this is my home, this place, and so I will stay here. And to some extent they probably own the land, so they probably do want to stay. But Shigeshima gets home and his parents are dead. they're not there, and his neighbor basically tells him that they're dead. And then his neighbor's also like, hey, weren't you a kamikaze pilot? And I was like, ooh, this is gonna be bad for you. And I don't know if it's then or later that we learn that he had a letter in his pocket from his parents that said, like, just come home. Which is that is really interesting to me personally, because that becomes the problem of like filial piety versus duty and collectivism to like your duty to the government, right? It's like, who do I listen to? Do I listen to my father, or do I listen to my father, Japan, the government? Because I'm getting conflicting information. And then, you factor in like, what do I want? And the answer is obviously like, I don't want to be a kamikaze. I don't want to do that. And then to have survivor's guilt now, not only for one, not being a kamikaze pilot and doing your job, two, the Godzilla attack, three, that your parents died and you didn't when they weren't in the war, and you were, it's a lot, And I was like, that's really brutal, bud. So he inherits the land and inherits whatever money they had. And then it's just, like trying to find work and do his business. But I was like, wow, that is beautiful. That's so interesting. And what an incredible way to start this movie. Wow. That's like 2 or 3 scenes. Moving on, Shigeshima is in a market, like trying to get food, I think. And he is, he tries to stop a robber, like somebody's running away with, something that's being chased through the streets. He tries to stop them as like a kind of good Samaritan thing. And she just hands him a baby and runs away. Which is so like K-drama coded. It was so funny that it's just like, because he's just like, what in the hell do I do? Like this, I have to have this baby now. And yeah, what are you supposed to do? Morally, I don't know. What is the correct answer? Especially because like, I guess normally I would be like, oh, go to like a government institution and like be like, I have someone handed me this baby, it's not mine. But everything's so disorganized at the time because of all the war shit that I'm like, I don't know that would work. So uncomfortable. So what he does is he just stays in like the center of that little market all day and like into the night. Is just sitting there for hours holding the baby, waiting for the like mom to come back and get the baby. And, just another great example of his freeze response. Like when he does not know what to do, he is frozen. He is stuck. And he's just sitting there with the baby and eventually gives up, goes to his next response with his flight. And he's like, ugh, I get whatever. He puts the baby down, like tries to leave the baby there. And then can't bring himself to do it. So he turns around and picks her up and starts leaving with her, being like, what am I going to do with this? And then just past the market, he is grabbed by the robber who handed him the baby and was running away. And then she was like, what were you doing? Like, why were you just sitting there? I couldn't go back over there because I'm going to get arrested. And he was like, why don't you come get her? And she's like, I couldn't go over there. You needed to come out here. And I think like that's really interesting as far as like, his freeze response, that it's like, yeah, he literally just needed to leave the square, and that would have solved the issue, right? But he didn't, because like his natural response is to just sit and wait. And like how kind of our natural like responses to stress can really like trap us or like get us into trouble. And it's like, if we would just use a different response sometimes, that we would be in a better spot. So that's really interesting to me. Also that clearly, they've got like some different responses, right? Like she's definitely got a flight response. She just run. And then she's kind of expecting her response too, that she's like, why didn't you run with the baby? Like, of course that's what you do, because that's what I did. But yeah, it's an interesting exchange between the two of them. The robber woman's name is Noriko, and he's like, well, here's your baby. And she's like, oh, it's not my baby. And you're like, what? This Godzilla movie is surprisingly funny. Like, I don't know if they're normally funny, but it was like gut-wrenchingly sad and beautiful, and then also like very funny. So I'm into that. Highly recommend. But she's just like, oh, that's not my baby, and tells us that the baby was given to her by neighbors who like needed someone to care for the baby. when she like fled because of the destruction of the bombs, and like those people were dying, and they were like, please take our baby. So now she just has a baby. And the like just duty in that to just be like, okay, now I guess I have a baby, when like she has no support system, she doesn't have a home, like she just ran away from her home being like decimated, and it's just like, yeah, I guess I am in charge of this baby now. And then, you know, when you're like, oh, she got caught stealing, we're like, yeah, that makes sense. Why you know, why is it so hard for them to give people food in these conditions? Please help them, government, right? You're supposed to be providing for us. That's the whole thing about respecting you, is that you provide for us. Anyway, but yeah, she's like, oh, I kept the baby. Everybody in this movie is such a good person. Like they're trying so hard to do their best to like be a good person, and it's lovely, and I love it. Noriko is like kind of pushy and is like, hey, let us stay with you. I'm a woman and this is a baby and we are cold and hungry and dying. And at first he's like, no. And then he's like, okay. And at first I'm like, oh, he'll let them stay for a little bit. And then it's like, no, they just live here now. They just kind of bullied their way into like, now they're like a little like broken kind of family. It's very cute. And then for a while you're like, are they like romantically involved? I cannot tell. But the answer is like, not really. They're kind of just playing house, because that comes up later. But yeah, he just, you know, he lost his mother and father, but now he gained a woman and a baby. Which also in Japanese culture, I think in general, but definitely at the time, was like, that's weird, for you to like live with someone that you're not married to have a baby out of wedlock, potentially. All of that is like not super acceptable in the 40s. I think probably most places, modern places, but definitely not in Japan. So I'm like, oh, scandal, double scandal. That and being a kamikaze pilot who did not die. Anyway, Sumiko, the neighbor who was like scolding him about not being dead, realizes that they have a baby and that the baby is not being cared for nutritionally, because they're kind of just feeding the baby whatever they have. Obviously, Noriko's not making milk because she wasn't pregnant, and so it's a little rough for them. And so she gives them her prized rice and acts really bothered about it, like, oh, I guess if I have to help you, I can do it. And gives them like her best rice so that they can make like rice milk for the baby to give the baby better nutrition. But it's so kind. It's so nice of her to do. Like, she doesn't have to do it, and it's so lovely. I'm like, I might cry just because I'm like, everybody's so nice in the movie. She doesn't have to do that, and she does, and I was like, that's so beautiful. Especially because she's like kind of a grumpy puss character of like, I guess I have to help you. But she's lovely. It's really beautiful. And I think they say at some point some of her kids died, or maybe all of her kids died, during the kind of bombings. And I do think she's kind of like, you know, itching to like be maternal and take care of these kids. So yeah, it's lovely. Everyone's wonderful in the movie. And it's really beautiful seeing the collectivism be about taking care of each other, and, you know, like kind of in a like a communal sense, as opposed to like having collectivism for the government to help them fight an enemy of the state, you know, to be like, no, our collectivism is about helping each other individually and like creating community and being neighborly and, you know, supporting each other so that we don't have to go to the government and we don't have to do that. And I'm like, what a beautiful message. That's so nice. In a highly Japanese move, Shikishima gets a new job on a boat, and on that boat are 3 very visually distinct characters of distinct ages with distinct personalities and looks immediately so that you know how to tell them apart. It's very anime in the best way possible. I love it a lot. So he meets 3 guys. They have a newbie who's trying to prove himself, the green one. They have a gruff but caring captain of the ship. And then they've got an old professor guy who's got like glasses like this. And he's sciencey, and it's like, why is he on this boat? He seems too smart to be here. Because the other 2 are clearly like more blue collar guys, and you're like, why is this guy here? He feels like he should have a lab coat on. But anyway, he got this job, and they are collecting bombs from the sea that the Japanese and the US left in the water, like mines, to try to blow each other up so that their boats don't actually run into them on accident. And this is like a real thing that people do, you know, like afterwards, there's like a bunch of bombs left by, you know, there's like a famously, Princess Diana and I believe Harry as well have both spent a lot of time trying to get different places that were like war-torn demined, like pull up all the mines that were in the ground. There's also these really cool rats, like with really long noses that are like big, that can sniff them out and help you find the bombs buried beneath the surface, like, and that can be buried, like they'll find them from like meters away, I think. So very cool. But yeah, this is like 100% a thing that happens and is like really interesting to show you kind of like a different way that there's fallout from the war, right? That it's like, and a different, and like what a good metaphor for Godzilla than like a bomb lurking under the water that you don't know where it is, and like if you don't take care of it will devastate you potentially when you least expect it. Very Godzilla. So I was like, how fun, how historically fun, what a good metaphor, and also a very scary metaphor for the big monster themselves. Shikishima is very good at shooting the bombs. Basically, they like clip the bomb so that it floats up after they find it with like sonar, and then they shoot it. Shikishima is really good at shooting it because he was a pilot who had a gunner on his ship. So they blow him up and are neutralized, and then he tells them that, you know, he's good at that because he was trained to be a pilot. And I like that because it shows how well like some of the skills transfer and the value that pilots like really have, as opposed to just being able to ram planes into people or other planes. That it's like, oh, if you know, didn't have all these pilots just crash themselves into various things, maybe they could be useful to society afterwards. They could be helpful to us with their various skills that they have. But instead, we're not doing that because that's not what Japan does at the time. Anyway, Shikishima continues to have like nightmares from PTSD of the Godzilla attack. He feels super guilty about surviving and like not doing anything. And he tells Noriko he's not even sure he's alive right now. And that like really hit me. And I was like, what a beautiful and like feels like really accurate description of like post-war trauma. Of like, he's like, I could be dead. Like this could be the afterlife. I feel like I should be dead. And I feel like maybe I did die. And like, how would I know? And especially like everything that happened to him when he got home is so weird. That I think part of it him is like, there's just no way. Like, I think a lot of it is him feeling like undeserving. He's like, there's no way I deserve to just be like basically gifted a family after my family died and like I didn't do my job. Like he thinks that he should be getting like, I think, cosmic recompense, right? That like something bad should be happening to him because he didn't do his job. And so he's like, I don't even know that this is real. And that's so beautiful and like haunting, and wow, like what a sublime situation. It's like beautiful but terrifying. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And once again, the subtitle writing, so good. Really good. And it really adds to like the gravity of like what people are saying and how they're feeling. All right, the boys come over for dinner and they're like, oh, Noriko. And Akiko, the little baby, is a toddler now, so some time has passed. And they're like, oh, you didn't tell us you were married? And they're like, oh, we're not married. And they're like, what? What do you mean? And then they're like, oh, but this is your baby? And then they're both like, no. Technically, no, it's neither of our baby. Which is like, what a weird thing to have to tell them. And like, you didn't warn them? Interesting, Shikishima. You didn't say anything? And I love it because Noriko's like, I'm not his wife, lol. Because they're like, wow, she's such a good wife. And she's like, no. And then they're like, scandalous. You know, the boys are like, wow, what a cool, fortunate thing to happen to you. Like, what a blessing that they're in your life. Which I'm like, that's so nice. Like, what a nice way to respond to that. As opposed to like, huh? I'm sorry, what's happening? How? What? They're like, oh, that's nice. How nice for you. That you just have this lady live at your house now with a kid. That's nice. And it's so funny to me. But of course Shigeshima ruins it, because he has to remind Akiko that he's not her dad, remember? And when he says remember, ooh, because that means this has happened before, where she said daddy, and he said, I'm not your dad, remember? And I was like, please, sir, she doesn't have a dad, okay? You are her dad. Functionally, you're her dad. Don't be weird about it. But he is, of course. And I love it because the boys get so mad at him. Like, I completely understand why he said, I'm not your dad. Because he feels undeserving, because he is uncomfortable, because of all those things. But the boys visiting are so angry. They're like, what is wrong with you? Never say that again. But like I said, it's a great way to show how temporary everything feels to Shikishima. Like, he's like, no, like, we're not married. No, I'm not your dad, because he doesn't feel like he deserves these things, but he also, I think, just feels like they're impermanent. It's just like afraid that they're gonna go away, but also he has a freeze response. So he's just like, well, I don't deserve these things. I'm not gonna like let myself be happy about these things, but also I'm not gonna do anything about it. And like, you know, is like simultaneously able to enjoy kind of having them around because he has a freeze response, but then also his inaction as far as like, you know, bonding with them and like maybe marrying Noriko if he's into her is like preventing him from like having an actual family and like having security, right? Because at any point they could both just leave. And I think he just assumes like, hey, if I don't do anything, maybe they just won't. But yeah, it's just, it kind of like, it really traps him. He's like kind of in a weird position where it's like, it is giving him something nice, but he's also like not allowing himself to make it better, you know, and like more permanent. Like he's living the life of a father and a husband, and he just like doesn't want to admit it because he like doesn't think he deserves it, I think. And so he's just like, no, we're not, and that's not what's happening. At some point he has these little grave markers in the house for his mom and dad, which is like, I think, fairly normal. And he goes over to them and at some point asks them, am I allowed to be happy now? And I was like, damn, that is touching and so sad, because he's basically like, I owe you something because I was supposed to come back and I didn't do it. Like, I came back alive, which is what he was told, come back alive. I checked my notes. But I came back and you weren't here. And then I don't feel like I was supposed to be alive. So am I allowed to be happy? Or like, do I need to keep grieving, but also like feeling this survivor's guilt and like it's my fault? And yeah, especially like given PTSD and like war trauma, I'm like, wow, that's so beautiful. There's so many lines in the movie that are like, wow, that is so touching and poignant and just gorgeous. Just really good writing. Noriko also asks him something like, why can't you just rest, basically? Like the war is over. And he says he's still fighting a war. And he means like, you know, like mentally. And I was like, that is also very poignant. I think like, you know, for a lot of people, the war does not end when there's like a ceasefire. It ends when they're able to get over it. And some people, that's never. And it's very sad. And I think in a lot of ways, like that's what makes this movie really beautiful, is that it's really accurate and it makes PTSD feel really understandable and like personable in a way that I think is kind of hard sometimes for people who haven't been through it. Because I think from the outside looking in, when you see someone like PTSD having like reactions, or like they can be very like standoffish or very uncomfortable in certain situations and kind of like randomly, you know, upset, that's confusing. But because we're seeing it from his perspective, we're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense why he would be that way. Yeah, everything makes sense. So the boys get told they have to take care of Godzilla because there's been Godzilla sightings. But they're just told on their little boat, their like tugboat, to just wait because they gotta wait for the big ship to come in to get Godzilla. But Shikishima sees like dead deep sea fish rising, and like the destruction, you know, that Godzilla is causing wherever they are under the water, and is so freaked out. Immediately is like, no, it's really bad. And I love that because it's like such a good representation of like a trauma response and like just seeing something that's related to your trauma, the like trigger, and then being triggered by it, and then also like being right, you know, that he's like, I know the signs before the bad thing happens. I remember, because it happened in the first scene, like it was, you know, very weird, and then it's like, oh, Godzilla's here. And I love that. Like, what a good way to physically represent that and like to make that interesting, and also, you know, scientifically interesting, because then you're like, oh, these are like really deep sea fish. They look really weird, which means like Godzilla's down there deep. You know, like walking past these things, killing them, and they're just like floating all the way up. So I was like, oh, that's kind of fun for the lore and the like, you know, what's going on scientifically. Also nice, like all the boys just believe him. None of them are like, there's no way you've seen the giant monster. They're all like, oh, that's terrifying. And I think a lot of times, you know, it's really easy to be like, yeah, okay, about something like very crazy like that happening to you, even like more realistic things. So I love that they're all just like, oh, that sucks, bud. You were on Odo Island, that's bad. And like, oh, I'm scared now. Like they just trust him. And how refreshing, you know, to be trusted when you're having some sort of trauma response, and the people around you like take you seriously. It's like the exact opposite of every like horror movie where the like wife is like, I'm seeing ghosts, and the husband's like, you're crazy. My wife's being so crazy right now. And then there are ghosts. It's just like, yeah, maybe just trust your wife, you know, maybe just trust the person who seems scared of the thing that might be bad. Also, this is the first time since the first like scene, basically, or maybe second scene, that we've seen Godzilla, and I was like, right, it's a Godzilla movie. Because so much of it has been like interpersonal stuff, so much of it has been like personal trauma stuff, so much of it has been like rebuilding Japan stuff, that I was like, right, Godzilla's in this movie. This is a Godzilla movie. Let's see what happens with the big lizard. So Godzilla comes up. I love this model of Godzilla. It's so like barnacle-y and like kind of looks like rock fissures. Like kind of looks like cracked like tectonic plate, like lava coming out of it kind of vibes. It's very cool. And so slow. Godzilla's so slow and like almost like it kind of gives like an animatronic or like a suit vibe, even though it's clearly CGI, in the way that it like looks at you and like appears. It's very cool. I really like the design. The spines on the back are really cool. And Godzilla appears. They get a bomb in Godzilla's mouth and blow it up, like blow its head up, and they're like, yeah, we did it. And then it regenerates immediately. Immediately. Starts fixing its head. And I love this plot-wise in that like they figured out a solution and then encountered a new problem, right? Like they were like, oh, we can't really hurt it on the outside because it's so armored, so we have to hurt it on the inside. And then it was like, great, except your little baby bomb is not gonna do it. Not for this big bad baby. Love that because it's like they did find a solution to something. They got more information and they're like, cool, now there's a different, worse problem that we have to figure out. But I appreciate when like even a failed solution in media can be like, no, we're learning something. It's just, and we had a good idea and it worked. It just didn't work all the way. And it's also terrifying because you're like, oh, we did it. And then it's like, no. And not only did we not do it, it's much worse than we thought it was. This is going to be so much harder to do than we thought it was going to ever be. And what a nightmare. How terrifying that you can blow up its head and it's just like, anyway, you know, like that's so much scarier than it already was, which was when it was impenetrable on the outside and squashing you to death like a bug. Now it's like, oh, and also you can't blow it up. Haha. So good on them. Terrifying. It also reminded me a lot of times when I'm in therapy, I'll like discover an issue. And when I figure out how that works, I realize how hard it's going to be to actually like fix the issue internally. So I like this to some extent about like, you know, like PTSD also, that it's like, once you realize the actual problem, you're like, wow, that's going to be hard to fix. Because that's like deeply ingrained in my brain. And it's very well mirrored, I think, feeling, and that like, yeah, once you get to the root of a problem, you can be like, wow, this is so tangled up and difficult to unwind that like this is going to be so hard for me to overcome. And you know, you do it anyway, hopefully. But yeah, I was like relatable, hashtag relatable to this Godzilla problem they're having. We also get to see like the full explosive effect of Godzilla, which is so cool because he has like spines on the back, and then they like kind of jut out, and like a blue light kind of goes as it like kind of powers up, you know, in like video games where it's like this beam takes 2 turns to power up, and then you can do it. It takes a while for it to power up, but you to like watch it happen, like the light go through like the fissures in the like hide of Godzilla, and it's so visually cool. And then the light like that shoots out of its mouth, like the laser beam, is like so cool and then so destructive, like because it is the bomb, right? Like the atomic bomb coming out of the mouth, and it's awesome. It was so cool. It looks so cool, and it's so scary. Like you see it just rip through a boat, and you're like, yeah, we are doomed. Like if it goes to shore, we're doomed. This is really bad. So yeah. The boat is able to get away, the boys are fine, but the government shuts down the task force for Godzilla fighting and basically says you can't tell anyone, and we're just gonna hope it goes away. So the government is doing a freeze response. Just like, let's just hope we never see it again. And I'm like, yeah, that's, I think, highly likely. And also, like, you can't tell anyone, so like they've just experienced this like super bad trauma, and the government's like, yeah, and don't talk about it, okay? You're not allowed to legally. And once again, just very feels very accurate to like PTSD, and for veterans, that it's like sometimes they are carrying secrets that the military will not allow them to tell anyone, and thereby they have no ability to like process that because they are legally not able to, and like that's pretty messed up. And it's already so hard to like relate, you know, when the trauma is that severe and like that specialized for like your family members, your friends, even sometimes people who are in the same field as you, hard to do, let alone if you like literally can't discuss some of those things because of government secrets, you know, or like because the government just doesn't want us to know like what terrible shit you were doing. And also maybe because the people have survivor's guilt and feel bad about doing it, you know, whether or not they were ordered to, like it still feels bad. Yeah, that's all my thought on that. I also appreciate this because, you know, it makes it really easy for the people in the movie to be overtly critical of the government, as they should. And really the enemies in this movie are Godzilla, the government, the Japanese government, like a little bit the American government at the beginning when it was the American military we were attacking, but even then they don't even really show the American military at all, because it's like, it's not about us, it's about dealing with the like fallout of the war and dealing with like their own issues basically. And it is a really good metaphor for the Japanese government to have known, you know, that the atomic bombs were coming and that was entirely possible, that the United States was going to drop them, and was still like, you know, like didn't get everybody to vote on it, didn't ask people like, hey, what should we do? The emperor was just like, I guess we'll see, but you know, dishonorable to surrender. And I know there's like varying accounts of like maybe they tried to surrender and it was like misinterpreted or something. I haven't looked into a ton of it, but you know, they waited a long time whether or not they ever decided to potentially surrender and put their people at huge risk. And like, while I am hugely critical of the American government for doing that, I'm also pretty critical of the Japanese government for not just giving up, for not, you know, caring enough about their people and their safety and how they're supposed to take care of them to not have that happen. So I think that was a really good way to show that, of being like, hey, we're just gonna hope the problem doesn't ever happen. Bye. And it's just like, you know, especially since, you know, this is a Godzilla movie, it's like, that's so unreasonable because obviously Godzilla's gonna come back. But yeah, interesting, very interesting ways to show these various issues. Noriko is like all dressed up because she decided she's gonna get a secretary job in the city, and Shishima is like worried about that because he's like, oh, if she has her own means of, you know, making money, then maybe she doesn't need me, and then she'll leave and then I'm alone and that's terrible. And so he finally like opens up to her about trauma, and that's nice, you know. It's good to see like he finally opening up to her, and she like clearly is so receptive of it that she's like, please just tell me what's going on, please let me help you. And so like that's really cute. And then the next day he sees a cute moment with Noriko and Akiko, and he looks at his parents' grave markers in the home and he asks if he can put this to rest. I'd like to try living again. And I was like, oh, that, you know, he really feels like he's just been in like limbo, and he's like, can I live again, like is that okay? Once again I'm gonna cry. Then I'm just like, that's so beautiful, it's so well written, and it's so like, it's really beautiful to watch him like find hope again, you know, and like have something to live for, and like want to get better, want to be there. It's really nice. This is why I was crying in the Godzilla movie. I'm crying talking about it. Okay, Noriko starts working in Ginza as a secretary, and Shigishima hears an announcement on the radio that Godzilla is attacking Ginza, or is like approaching Ginza. And so he goes there. Godzilla is so slow in this movie, like super robotic almost, and they do such a great job of showing people running for their lives and never being fast enough to get away, because Godzilla is so big that it's like, even though Godzilla is like, you know, so slow walking, every step Godzilla's taking is like much farther than they could possibly run. So like, you know, unless you run laterally, you're out. And even then it's like just can swipe around, you know, like shoot the beam, knock over buildings. Amazing, beautiful. There's something in it lacking speed too that's like very daunting. Like, it would be scary if Godzilla was fast, but it's just like Godzilla's not even concerned, not even in a hurry. Like, it just, the destruction will happen, I will get there, you know. And that's like deeply unsettling in a very cool way that I like a lot. There's a very cool action scene with Noriko in a train. Godzilla like goes over to the train and like picks it up in its mouth, and Noriko's like dangling from a bar. It looks fantastic, like all of it's CGI for sure. But just the CGI in general is like really good. It looks fantastic, which I think is partly because the director-writer also is credited in effects. Like, he was director, writer, and doing effects, or like in charge of effects. And like, to make sure that they looked accurate and like how he wanted them to, it's like really obvious that he like spent a lot of time on that, and it's like, they look super beautiful. I think they're great. So wonderful job, sir. You really killed it. And I personally don't think that most people can be a director, a writer, and something else effectively and make a good movie, because I think most good movies are made by like collaboration. And if one person does too many things, it is not good. The movie gets bad. And so you have to be pretty talented in order for me to think that that's a good idea. And I think this was a good idea. It's really good. So great job, sir. Bravo. Proud of you. There's a very poignant scene of like reporters on top of a building, and they're like reporting about Godzilla and like what they're doing and like all the destruction, and then Godzilla just turns and like breaks their building too. And it's like, yeah, it's fascinating being like, oh, we're so close to the action, you know, like reporting on this, but still like being like, oh, but we're removed from it. And then Godzilla's like, nah, I'm gonna get you too. Noriko is walking slowly in a crowd of people, exhausted by like what she's already had to do of like being dropped from this train, hanging onto it to try to survive, dropping into water, and then now she's like trying to figure out how to get home because the train's all messed up. And she kind of falls on the ground, I think, exhausted, and turns to look at Godzilla. It kind of looks like she's just accepting her fate, like, well, I'm just done. Like, it's just over for me. And Shikishima shows up, and he grabs her, and he pulls her into, like, an alleyway, basically. And I love this because it's, like, huge for his character to show how much he cares about her. It's huge to show him have, like, a fight response. Like, he ran there to save her, you know, it's like, I have to get there to help her. And that he's willing to put his life on the line for like people he loves. Like, there are things that he's willing to sacrifice himself for, you know, because I think that's a big thing of like, oh, you're just not willing to sacrifice your life. Like, he's selfish about the kamikaze thing. And it's like, no, he is 100% willing to sacrifice his life. He just wants it to be for like what he feels like is a good cause. And Noriko's life is a perfectly worthy cause to him. And I'm like, that's so beautiful, so lovely. Wow. And like, you know, for the collective again, like not for the government because they asked me to, like for the group, right? Like I'm willing to risk my life for the group, including when he got his job on the boat. They told him it was going to be dangerous. And he was like, well, I have to do that for us, like for Noriko and for Akiko, like for the child. And I love that too. Like he's willing to risk himself. It just has to be for love, like for people he cares about. And that's lovely. I love that. Anyway, the Japanese military shoots Godzilla with tanks. It doesn't do anything at all. And it's a great way to show, I think, like the futility of trying to even attempt to like prevent an atomic explosion. Like it's just not going to happen. There's just no way, you know? So it's like, yeah, go ahead and try to shoot it. Not going to work. You see Godzilla power up, which like I said is so cool. And it feels like it represents how you can see the bomb kind of coming from far away and just like nothing you can do about it. It's just gonna happen. Godzilla shoots the laser out of the mouth and creates like a mushroom cloud, which obviously is, you know, relevant to atomic bombs. Doesn't even shoot in the direction of our characters, but the like reverberations go out and like hit everything. And it's really cool because like first it's like a wave that flies out and then it like gets sucked back in. And it's like really cool to watch. It was really beautiful and like interesting to see. And like I think that's true of the bombs as well because it's like they expel so much energy so fast and that kind of gets sucked back in. I'm not a scientist, I don't know. But I thought it was really cool visual. I think it's really beautiful. And in that moment of like the wave coming out, coming to get them, Noriko and Shikishima are both like next to an alleyway, but in like the main street. And Noriko pushes Shikishima into the like alleyway, and that blocks him from taking any impact directly while she flies off screen. And I was like, honestly, so beautiful of you to sacrifice yourself and be heroic, but dear God, this poor little baby came all this way to save you and to risk his life, and now you've given him more survivor's guilt. Like, he cannot handle this level of survivor's guilt about everyone. And you know, we don't see that Noriko is dead, but you just watch her fly off screen and you're like, that's pretty bad. Doesn't look good. Doesn't look recoverable. It shows up as his freeze response once again. He could have grabbed her and he didn't. He could have pushed her and he didn't. He just stood there in like a panic, you know, and she was like, no, you're gonna be okay. One of us has to be okay. And that's lovely. Also her fight response, like I think she has a fight response, and so her response was like, I'm gonna push you, I'm gonna have an impact on this, we're gonna get through this. And I think that's lovely. They do a really good job of like holding those through, you know, kind of everything, I think. So Noriko is gone, presumed dead, and Shikishima falls to his knees and just like screams in the street like bloody murder. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's fair. And I appreciate that. I appreciate an actor who will like commit to being kind of like intense and like kind of over the top because the moment needs it. There's definitely some over the top acting in this that I think is just like kind of just Japanese acting compared to American acting. But like especially that moment, I'm like, no, that's fair. This is so much, you know. I would be losing my mind. It's the least you could do is scream bloody murder at the top of your lungs. Shikishima has a funeral pyre set up for Noriko, and looks just like empty inside. Just looks like dead. They don't tell Akiko because she's like 2 or 3, even though she asks about her mom, but she cries when she's told that she's not going to be there for a while. Which, man, side note, this child actor does a perfect guttural baby cry on command. It's insane to me. Like, I can't remember if there's a cut or not right before she cries, but she has a perfect baby cry. It was amazing. I was like, wow, this give her an Oscar. What an amazing baby. What a good actor, baby. Great job. Great casting. I hope I see this child again. I forgot to mention this, but after Shikishima, on the beginning at Odo Island, after he like you know, gets blamed by Tachibana, like, this is your fault. Tachibana gave him pictures of like the dead people, of like their families and stuff that they had on them, to be like, look, this is your fault, and like all these people are suffering because of you. Once again, I think Tachibana is just projecting, which is why I'm not mad at him. But Shikishima still has them, and he sees the pictures he was given by Tachibana of the dead soldiers and their families, and he says, "You can't forgive me, is that it?" And I'm just like, oh, there's so many lines from him that are so devastating. You can't forgive me, is that it? Like, I was almost about to be happy, and you just won't let me, will you? Like, my mistake means I'm never gonna get to be happy. Wow. Like, emotionally, there's so many gut punches emotionally in this movie. It's crazy. That I was like, damn. And clearly he sees Noriko's death as a punishment for like his earlier inaction, that he's just like, yeah, this is, you know, not only is this my fault, but also like this is because of other stuff I did previously too. Like I was never gonna get to be happy, right? And it's so sad. It's so like poetic in a way, but just brutally sad. So Doc tells Shikishima, Doc is the like doctor guy from the boat, who's like the science man. He tells Shikishima that they are trying a civilian attack on Godzilla, like they're doing a little grassroots Godzilla fighting, and he asks if he would join, which of course he's gonna join. And then Doc gets some people in a room and he gives them a presentation about what he wants to do. And he wants to trap Godzilla in water, in like a cocoon of water, like with bubbles, and then plunge them down into the depths of the sea really fast, and hope that the pressure blows Godzilla up. But we have already seen that like Godzilla gets pretty deep down because of the deep sea fish that pop up. So I'm like, I don't know if it's gonna work. And so everybody's like, is it gonna work? Do we know it's gonna work? And he's like, no, we don't, because we don't know anything about him. But so plan B is they attach like little rockets to him basically. And then they're gonna take Godzilla that they plunge deep in the deep sea with the pressure, and then bring him back up really fast, and then hopefully that makes him blow up. And honestly, not the worst ideas, and like kind of fun. Like I was like, oh, this is like fun. And I love the part of like monster movies or like just this kind of stuff where it's like, what's the weird science plan we're doing? Like what's the like mostly simple but also like slightly complicated and weird science plan we have to fix our problem. And this one was pressure, down, up, explosion, hopefully. And if nothing else, that hopefully it'll just weaken Godzilla and like weaken the like shell basically on the outside, which, you know, fair enough, seems pretty fun. I like it. Most of the people in attendance are former Navy who are reluctant to do any of that, but they all agree to it because they want to help the people. And basically they're going to have like a bunch of boats go out and like surround Godzilla and then put this little thing on it and plunge Godzilla into the depths. Shikishima asked Doc if he can find him a plane so he can lead Godzilla where they want him to go. Like basically be like, ooh, I'm flying around you, and then like take Godzilla to the right spot, just in case Godzilla's not where they need to be, which I like because that's very famous of like little planes flying around Godzilla and Godzilla going, so I was like, oh, fun, we get to do a little bit of that. The captain asks Shikishima if he's trying to die because of the, you know, kamikaze stuff and the various stuff like with Noriko, and he deflects the question. He doesn't answer. Classic deflection. Captain grabs Shikishima and yells at him for not marrying Noriko when she was alive, and he says, don't you think, or Shikishima says, don't you think I wanted that too? So basically Captain's like, why didn't you just marry her? And Shikishima's like, I wanted to, I just couldn't, basically. And I'm like, once again, love how everybody is so caring, and it's so obvious that everybody's just like upset and that they have different responses to that, and that those are in conflict, but also they're all very understanding of each other, and it's nice. Weirdly like utopian in some ways, this movie, about like how people are treating each other and how people's like emotional issues are being taken seriously. That's all very lovely. Anyway, Cap asks why he didn't marry Noriko, and he says one of the best lines from the movie, because my war isn't over yet. And I was like, wow, once again, really, really poignant, really beautiful, that, you know, I put my notes: amazing, incredible, one of a kind, never been done before. Truly, yeah, wow, amen, A+, amazing. They find Shikishima a plane. It's a new one that never got off the ground. It's like a prototype basically, but it works. Well, it will work, but it's not ready to fly. Since it's a prototype, they need a mechanic. And Shikishima immediately says, I know a mechanic. I know the guy, and starts looking for Tachibana, which, given that Tachibana hates him so deeply, is fascinating because he's like, well, he's the best mechanic and we need him. And I think like kind of poetically, Shikishima wants Tachibana there to show him that he can be a hero and that he can do it. I think some of it is like, hey, let me prove to you that I can do it and I will do it. I can do the hero thing now. And I think that's kind of like lovely and nice to like let Tachibana also be able to be a part of that. In like, he was so deeply upset about Godzilla killing all of his friends that he was like, you know, being like, hey, you need to be included in this. And really goes out of his way, because he tries to contact Tachibana, can't find him. He goes to like an office. They try to find his like last known location, which is like really hard given all the missing people and records and stuff going on because of the war. And he sends a bunch of letters to like any place Tachibana could be to try to get in contact with him, and like begs Doc to wait for him, and like slams his head into a table, basically like bowing, like, please let me do this. And then Doc's like, okay, you're being a lot. But it's really lovely. And then I also think shows like the importance of like collectivism over ego, right? Because this is Tachibana, or not Tachibana, this is Shikishima being like, my personal feelings about this are not important. What's important is that we do this and get this done, and that we do it right. And I'm gonna contact this guy who hates me and maybe would want to kill me, to be honest. And that's the guy I need. That's my guy. Shikishima writes him letters. He doesn't respond for a while. But then eventually Tachibana finds him. Shikishima's like walking home from like a bar or dinner or something, and Tachibana hits him in the back of the head with like a club. And you're like, oh, and then hits him in the face too. And then he throws the letters on Shikishima, and he's reading them, saying that Odo was Tachibana's fault, is what Shikishima wrote him. And Shikishima's like, yeah, I had to write that because I knew that if I wrote that you would find me. And I'm like, oh, we're doing like sassy moves here of like, hey, I know you well enough to know that like this is what's gonna hurt you to make you come find me, and that you have a fight response, clearly. But also weirdly beautifully connecting and being like, hey, I know what's gonna make you like emotional and react and be upset, because it's what makes me upset about it, because it's how I feel. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's so beautiful. The movie's so good. The level of empathy here, where he understands Tachibana, who verbally reamed him, who's physically fighting him, and then he's being so nice. And like, he understands that he like did so because he was ashamed, and like he felt guilt about it too. And I'm like, ugh, it's so good. It's so good. The movie's so good. Tachibana still has a limp from Odo Island, which is like a cool way to show like permanent damage from the war, you know, like a physical scar, and that he's still like obviously mentally scarred. And Shikishima says it's Godzilla again, the same thing as Odo Island. And Tachibana says, no, I still don't want to help you. Shikishima pleads and tells him he blew up a bomb in the creature's mouth, and it did something, even though it didn't fully work. And so he wants to fly a plane full of explosive into its mouth and kill it, fulfilling his like kamikaze responsibility. Basically, he's like, I want you to fill a plane with bombs so that I can fly into its mouth, and then it'll die and I'll die. And I can do my big heroic sacrifice and basically like do what I should have done the whole time. Which is, you know, beautiful and sad, and to the audience I think scary, because we're like, no. And then for a minute I'm like, if the movie ends and the thing that is, in most movies, a heroic sacrifice like this would be like, wow, touching, beautiful, lovely, wonderful. However, his whole trauma revolves around not being a kamikaze. And if the answer is like, yeah, you should have blown yourself up, when the government told you to. Ooh, not a great message, I don't think, for the movie. And so I was like, huh? So I was like, well, I hope he doesn't blow himself up. But also, ooh. But so he tells him that, and then says, the war isn't over yet for you either. And it's like, hey, I can tell that you are still bothered by this, and like, this is the way we can fix it. And I was like, wow, what a brilliant film. How beautiful. So Shikishima lies to Doc and says he fell and that's how he got hurt. Like, doesn't even blame Tachibana for it, which, like, he got hit in the face multiple times and in the back of the head. So it's like, that's not from falling. But that's so nice. He, like, doesn't even want Doc to be mad at Tachibana because he's like, no, I get it. That's fair. Tachibana shows up and says he'll get the plane ready. Doc makes a speech about the plan, and he mentions how cruel it is that the Japanese government asks kamikaze pilots to, you know, kill themselves, even though in other countries, like in Germany, they have ejection seats. Like, those exist. Those have been invented, and they're just choosing not to do it. They just don't have them in their planes. They're like, we don't need them. You just crash. And I love that because it shows, like, how much the Japanese government really sees them as fodder, and how much, like, how little care there is in, like, individual citizens, that they really see them as just, like, a group of useful little pawns instead of, like, individual people who have lives. And, like, a really poignant time to say that when it seems like Shikishima might be ready to just, like, take himself out for the cause, which, like, in a way is nice, but also devastating, you know? And, like, kind of the whole point of the movie has been trying to get him to want to live again and, like, be a person. And so it being like, now he's going to do a big heroic sacrifice is, like, not nearly as heroic as it would be, you know, almost in any other movie. And, like, that is also so cool. Like, that's so profound and interesting, and, like, what a way to turn that on its head. Beautiful, gorgeous, no notes, incredible. Never been done before. So the young guy on the crew, like, of boys that were on the original boat is like, ooh, I can't wait to go fight Godzilla. And then Doc and Captain are like, you can't come. And he is devastated. He was too young to be in the war in the first place, he mentions when they first get on the boat together, and, like, clearly has guilt about that because, like, he thinks that he should have fought, clearly, and it ended before he could. And, like, clearly has survivor's guilt about that. And so he, like, screams as they run away and, like, begs them, like, please let me come, please let me help, please let me do this. And they just keep walking. And once again, so beautiful in that I understand everything that everyone's feeling. Like, I completely understand why the boy feels survivor's guilt, why he so desperately wants to prove himself, why he so, you know, intensely is like, please let me help, please let me do this. This is, like, the only thing I can do. And I also understand why Captain and Doc are like, no, you're a sweet little baby boy, and we will not allow you to die over this. That's stupid. Go be a person and leave us alone. And that's my favorite thing about this movie, is it's just like, I get it. I get everybody. And it just is so beautiful. Shikishima goes home, and Akiko presents him with a drawing of him, Noriko, and her. And once again, the kid starts bawling on command, and he says, don't worry, I'm not leaving you. But looks unconvinced while he says it, and we're all like, oh, but aren't you? And also, hasn't she lost enough? This is going to be the second dad that she's lost. This is going to be this, you know, the second parent she's lost in weeks. It's awful. He leaves a note for the neighbor and heads out. Shikishima gets a tour of the plane by Tachibana, where the explosives are in the engine area and, like, whatever. And he sits in the pilot seat, and his hand starts shaking while he's sitting there, like, getting ready to fly. And he says, that's funny. Part of me wants to live. Ugh. God, it's beautiful. It's so lovely. I'm gonna cry again. I'm gonna try not to cry. But wow, like, he was like, no, I am sure that I want to do this. Like, I want to go, you know, and I want to sacrifice myself. And then he gets in the seat, and he has his little shake. And he's surprised. He's surprised that, like, somewhere inside, he's like, no, I do actually want to live. Wow. It's so beautiful. oh, it like makes me mad how good this movie is. Even just read my notes, I'm like, wow. And that made me cry the first time, because, you know, he thought dying for the cause would be easy. He was like, oh, but dying will be fine, you know? And then he's still like, wow, no, I still want to be alive, even though all this terribleness has happened to me. And it's like, whew, that's so lovely. That's so human. And so just, it's so relatable. It's so understandable. It's so amazing. It's like, just like the human condition, the human spirit is remarkable, you know? And this is where Tachibana reminds Shikishima that like the guys on Odo Island wanted to go home too, but they got squashed by like bugs. Which like I said, beautiful idiom. Love that they put that in the subtitles. And such an evocative way to describe it. The Tachibana, you know, Shikishima got knocked out, so he didn't see almost any of that. But Tachibana watched them get taken out, couldn't physically move to help them, and saw them just like their humanity just entirely reduced. And he like clearly is still thinking about it, like visually, like him, the way he describes that makes it seem like he can still see it happening right now. And that's, you know, understandable and also like fascinating. Shikishima says he understands, and he pulls out the photos from Odo Island that Tachibana gave him years ago, and he looks at them, and then he also has the drawing Akiko gave him in there. And Tachibana is like clearly very surprised that Shikishima has these pictures. And I think is like, whoa, he's like really deeply affected by this too. And I'm like, yeah, babe, he is. This is all really bad for everybody. Tachibana says, then you're finally ready, and shows him how to prime the bomb. And then he says, one more thing. And then they don't show us. But I knew because of what Doc said earlier, and also because I think they mentioned that it was a German plane that they were using. Like it was like a German plane prototype, or like they got a German plane or something. And a note Tachibana made that this plane has an ejection seat. And I think Tachibana said, then you're finally ready. He meant like to live. Like, oh, you're finally ready to move on with life and like actually do this. And he sees Shikishima like pull up the drawing and like Akiko and what he has to lose if he dies. And it's like, you're ready to hear about the ejection seat and like take it seriously, you know, and be like, hey, use this, please, please. Also cool because it shows that Tachibana is like not actually feeling vengeful towards Shikishima, because he could have just said F you and like not told him. But he wants him to live too. He's like, no, you deserve to be alive also. And that's so lovely. And like that made me cry too, of Tachibana just being like, hey, please live. Because he hates him to some extent, you know, but clearly he doesn't actually. And once again, everyone's so nice. Everybody's so kind. Everyone cares about the collective so much, but like in the most human, beautiful, supportive way. And I love it so much. Tachibana knows it's like actually not Shikishima's fault. He just blamed him because he's upset, and we all know this, and that the actual enemies are Godzilla and the Japanese government. So let's get him. Akiko wakes up in the morning and gives the neighbor the note that Shikishima left her in the envelope, which is a ton of cash and presumably the deed to his house, and a note that says, look after Akiko, use this money for her. So clearly he was intending to kamikaze before he heard about the ejection seat, like for definite, you know. It wasn't like, and you know, to a certain extent, like that was what he was planning to do, like that's what he had shown us, but also, you know, not all the characters know that that's what he was trying to do, or they wouldn't have tried to let him do it. So yikes. That it was like, oh, clearly he did not mean to come back. But the beauty of the ejection seat is like now he is given the opportunity of like, do I take myself out or do I live? Because now he's got both options, and that is amazing. I love that. Anyway, Godzilla shows up early, and so they gotta get moving. And Doc mentions he's worried that Shikishima flying because he's a failed kamikaze pilot, but the captain assures him that he's a Kiko, so he wouldn't do that. Which is such good placement after what we just saw, because yeah, he 1000% would do that. He was planning on doing it. We see a flaming warship be thrown through the air like it's nothing and crash into the shore. And it's just like, wow, Godzilla's here. What a cool visual. Because like we don't even see Godzilla throw it. We just see it flying. And it's terrifying. Because it's so unsettling to just like, because like that's not, you know, warships aren't supposed to fly through the air. So you're like, ooh. And it's on fire. Anyway, Shikishima gets to the plane, puts a picture of Noriko on his dashboard, and gets going. Tachibana and the other mechanics salute him. Another beautiful like show of respect to him. We get a shot under the plane that's like very similar to the first shot of the movie, which is very fun. They need Godzilla in a specific spot, so they lure Godzilla to the spot for the sinking plan. Shishima's gonna lure Godzilla there. Cap tells him not to do anything rash, and he just doesn't respond. Which then everybody's like, please don't do it. And I love that even they know. And they're like, babe, if you could just not, please don't do that. Please don't do that. And I'm like, God bless them for being like, hey, we know what you're doing. Don't do it, please. Because he can do the plan now without sacrificing himself. So if you, it's all up to like, does he want to live? Really is like the question. And like, that's, wow, that's beautiful. They get Godzilla where they need to be. Godzilla does the heat ray, but once it's on cooldown, it takes a while. And so you gotta roll to see if you get your breath weapon back, like D&D, and they don't. And so they sink Godzilla, which does not work. And then, but Godzilla doesn't like it, for sure. And then they bring Godzilla back up, but it's like stuck somehow. And then they can't, for whatever reason, get Godzilla all the way up. And then tugboats come by to help them. Which has the baby boy, the like young man who wanted to be included and like wasn't. He brings the tugboats to the rescue and saves them, and it's so cute because he's like, we're coming to help you. And both Doc and Cap are like, oh, thank God he's here. I'm so happy, because they wanted him to be there. They just didn't want him to die, you know? And so they're like, oh, I'm so happy he's here. Whole crew's here. Everybody gets like a little heroic moment. It's so lovely. I love this movie. Godzilla is up, looks very bad, but it's okay, has the breath weapon ready, like right when they come up. And they all have a look of fear and devastation. It's like slow-mo, you know, like, oh God, this is it. And then Shikishima coming in fast, so fast, it's crazy. I remember just like you just aren't expecting it to be that like abrupt and intense. Shikishima flies straight into his mouth, which is open for the breath attack, like perfect timing, and looks at the picture of Noriko, thinks about her alive, doing like laundry on a summer day. And I was like, God, it's so beautiful how mundane that is. Like that he was like imagining her like being beautiful for him, you know, like a beautiful moment with her. And it was just like her just existing, you know, like being normal. I was like, oh, that's so lovely. It's so nice. He primes the bomb, and right before he flies into the mouth, he pulls another lever by his leg and he ejects. And we're like, yes. And for a moment, you don't know that he did it, but we see him pull, so we know. But you know, they don't know. The boys in the boats don't know. The plane slams into Godzilla's mouth so fast, you don't even see Shikishima fly out. The explosion happens. The image of Godzilla being exploded is smoke coming out of his mouth. And you can't even see the head because there's just so much smoke unmoving in the water. It's really cool. It's a really cool visual. It's very ominous and like, you know, like holding your breath of like, did it work? It's awesome. It's all the visuals are so cool, like truly. The boys are looking for Shikishima in the air. They're like, did he get out? Is he okay? And then we see the parachute. We're like, yes. Which is, you know, what makes the movie so poignant is this moment of like Shikishima is devastated. He's broken. He barely feels alive. He has an easy way out, and like a heroic one, you know, like this, that is like, yeah, people would be like, wow, what a hero. Like people would think positively of him. And he's choosing to live anyway, even though, you know, like he misses Noriko and he's so upset. And it's hard for me to think of anything like more human than that. I was like, wow, that's just, wow. Also, he sees himself as selfish at the beginning for not being willing to sacrifice himself for the cause. And at this point, we see like the selfless act is to like live and not to sacrifice himself, to like work through it and to be here to fight and help everyone else. And like, wow, wow, I don't know that there's a better movie. It's so good. Ugh. he also waited for like Doc's plans to try out, like showing like his personal sacrifice would be the last resort, even if he was to do it, right? That he was like, no, we're gonna see if this works first. And only do it if like absolutely necessary. And without Doc's plan softening up Godzilla's like insides, I don't think it would have worked anyway. Which is great because that's once again just like collectivism, you know, like everybody working together to make it work and using their special skills and being inspired to like make it work is amazing. If Shima had any fear of being seen as a coward, for this, he doesn't need to. Everybody cheers. They're so happy. They're like, he did it. He's our hero. And I was just like, ah, this is so lovely. And it's what he deserves, you know? Like, wow, he is a hero. That was so beautiful. And getting to literally defeat the like enemy that like gave you some of this like really deep trauma, like that's so beautiful, you know? Like that's so wonderful. And he defies his culture of honorable death. And that's so lovely. I was like, wow, I am obsessed with this. This is so incredible. But what really made me cry is Tachibana hears over the radio that Shikishima's alive and he breaks down and starts crying. And I was like, man, he's so happy that Tachibana's alive. Like or not Tachibana, Shikishima's alive. He's so happy. And like, he's obviously happy that Godzilla's dead too, but he's like really happy that Shikishima's alive, even though he's like almost exclusively been mean to him. It flashes back to a moment of Tachibana showing him the lever to how to eject and commanding him simply with just the word like live. Like, I want you to live. Oh, it's amazing. Godzilla sinks. That's pretty cool. They all salute Shikishima. And then they get back to shore. The boys hug Shikishima. Everyone's so happy. And Sumiko, his neighbor, is there. She like runs up to him very dramatically, gives him a note and hits him pretty hard. And then we cut to Shikishima running through a hospital with Akiko. And Noriko is there and is alive, like very injured, but in a hospital bed alive. And Shikishima finally breaks down crying. Noriko asks if his war is finally over and he nods, which is amazing because he might have like taken himself out because he thought Noriko was dead and like he just didn't have a future and she wasn't even dead. Like he could have just had that with her the whole time and he could have just robbed himself of that because he just decided, I don't want to live anymore. And I think that's really beautiful to show you like a future you could be missing out on if you're not like willing to buckle down like through your struggles and like, you know, just continue living. Anyway, that's it. And by that's it, I mean, this is so long. But God, I love this movie. Wow, it was so beautiful. Oh my goodness. A+. Please, everyone, watch it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy listening to me, you know, rant about why I think this movie is amazing. And yeah, I'm gonna hopefully do this for some more movies that I like, and maybe just some other movies that I watch that I think are interesting to talk about. So thanks for joining me for my first like film review, and I'll see you next time. Bye.